Hello, friends. That's my Joe Rogan impersonation. Let me know if it's good. So anyway, guys, I found the best way to play the Sega Dreamcast. But before I can tell you that, I have to tell you this. I acquired my first Sega Dreamcast in the year 2000, just after all the computers in the world stopped working and society shut down. As the world was ending, Sony decided they're going to release a new gaming console. And my older, cooler cousin, who I always looked up to, was pretty excited about the PS2 and its ability to let you digitally sleep with hookers and then run them over with your car and take your money back. So he got his PS2, and he got to beat up hookers and all that fun stuff that I watched him do as a 10-year-old kid. And he gave me and my brother his Sega Dreamcast. Now, this was great for us because he already had all the good Dreamcast games. Some of these games included Ready to Rumble Boxing, Crazy Taxi, Hydro Thunder, one of my absolute favorite games of all time. This list goes on, but today isn't the day to tell you about my favorite Dreamcast games. That's for another day. The point is, I didn't know this console was failing, and it wouldn't have mattered to 10-year-old me anyhow. This system was special to me. Not only was I the only person in my group of friends that even had heard of a Sega Dreamcast, but it was insanely fun, and my friends loved coming over to play it with me. The strange loading times and the loud disk drive that sounded like it was sawing logs in half went from an annoying sound to a very welcomed one. The memory cards could play mini games, which at the time was just mind-blowing. You could play games on a crappy handheld with a $7 battery that lasted at least 4 hours. But even with all the weird quirks this system had, it was just plain fun. It was designed to give up to a 640 by 480 output, and that's pretty impressive for a console at that point in time. You could actually achieve a higher resolution using a VGA box as well. Also, it was the first system to allow for online multiplayer, so you could play games like Phantasy Star Online, a very impressive system that would take years to figure out how to emulate properly. And though there have been emulators for it over the years, none of them really met my standards of how a Dreamcast should run to run the games properly and really enjoy them like when I was a kid. Until now, that is. I sold my Dreamcast recently after having kids when I needed the money. Some of these games got sequels and releases on newer consoles, but none of them really felt the same and captured the way that the Dreamcast made me feel. For example, Hydro Thunder made its way over to the Xbox. Some of you might not know it's there, but it's actually part of the Midway Arcade Classics Part 3. But no matter how I adjust the volume settings, they just never sound right to me, and it drives me absolutely crazy. It's amazing something as small as sound effects and background music ratio could affect, the nostalgia and how I feel about the game while I'm playing it, but it really does. So, on my quest to relive the glory days of my youth and play some of those elusive, difficult to run properly games, I stumbled across a video by ETA Prime. Now, I am a big fan of ETA Prime because he does tons of emulation tests on different PCs and on Raspberry Pis and in different Android-based systems as well. I saw he was running a Pi 4 and claimed that maybe he found the best Dreamcast emulator ever. And of course, I had to click on it and see. Now, I don't have a Pi 4 just yet, and Bluetooth Dreamcast controllers aren't available yet, but I do have a PS4 controller and I have a cheap laptop. I downloaded Redream, directed my library to the folder where my games are stored, and it popped up with cover art for the games, even showing me in the list of games that 2 of them aren't playable, and that was fine. Redream is holding itself to a high standard. These particular games didn't meet that standard, and they were kind of obscure games and not that important to me. But the point is that the Redream emulator didn't want me to launch a game that it knew was going to run like garbage. This emulator is basically plug and play. The menu is easy to navigate. The emulator recognized my PS4 controller all on its own. It knew when I plugged it in that it was a PS4 controller, and then it mapped the buttons for me, so I didn't have to do any setup. It even put the cover art on the games for me, so I didn't have to worry about finding pretty cover art. This is by far the most user-friendly and the prettiest menu for an emulator that I've ever seen. So next was my emulation test, and I was completely surprised. I didn't have Ready to Rumble Round 2 when I was a kid, but I always wanted to play it because I had the first one when I was growing up, and I've always wanted to play Round 2. So I've tried over the years to get it running, and this was the first emulator that I have found that runs it perfectly. No graphical glitches like the other emulators that I've used. No frame rate drop. It's basically a locked 60 frames per second all the time. You'll see it jump between 59 and 60 constantly while you're playing, but let's be honest, guys, this game does run at full speed. It looks fantastic. You can see where this video looks choppy. That was my laptop struggling to keep up with the recording while playing it on the emulator because I have a garbage laptop. But while I was playing the game, this thing ran perfectly, I can assure you. That was the recording and not the emulator. This emulator ran absolutely phenomenal and exceeded my expectations. This thing, out of nowhere, fell into my lap. Thank you, ETA Prime, because I now have a piece of my childhood back that I thought I wouldn't really get for a while. If you guys would like to see me play more Dreamcast games on the channel, let me know in the comments. It's been an absolute pleasure to share this with you guys. Another system that brings me just so much joy. Until next time, guys, keep dreaming.